Well, my name's Frank Shelton. I was with 152 Squadron from the time we left Wittering and went to North Africa as part of the torch operation. We landed at Algiers and I was with them until they were in India at Feni, where I was posted from Feni to number 4 Indian Air Force Squadron and finished most of my career in the Air Force with that unit. When we first arrived in North Africa, we made our way from the beach on the following day after being disembarking from the near Hellas, the boat which brought us out from England. And then we had about a 10-kilometre march with full kit from Maison Blanche to Maison Blanche airfield, which was being used to sort out the squadrons as they arrived from England. And then by train we went up to a place called Crubes, which was near a city called Constantine. And while we were there, we made a bad start really. One night we were able to go on a Liberty drive into Constantine, and on the way back I got off the lorry at the airfield, and then the lorry carried on to where the troops were actually billeted, and in so doing I had to cross a level crossing. And at this level crossing, a train hit the lorry, and where the members of the unit were involved in multiple injuries, and unfortunately we lost 7 men killed on that night. Not a very imposing start to an overseas tour. One of the men I remember was a friend of mine who was a corporal. If I remember rightly, he was an instrument maker. And whilst we'd been in England, he got married to a young lady, and for some reason they had a night out in Stamford. And I think it was a hotel called the George they went to, but I think they were so embarrassed with each other's company that they even invited me to go with them, which struck me as rather strange. But that was one of the most unfortunate moments on my tour overseas, to lose this friend in that manner. There are several photographs of the injured members of the party which I still have in my possession, including Flight Sergeant Monk, George Rylett. I believe Titch Shepherd was also involved. I think he was with us on that night as well. But they were only minor in comparison with the other members of the unit. We weren't long at Crubes before we moved to Schuylkill Harbour. Schuylkill Harbour was a Sommerfeld track, if I remember correctly, where you got a mesh mesh framework over on I don't know if it's canvas or Hessian to make it so that we could run the aircraft on the field, which was all so muddy, really muddy. We were slipping and sliding all over the place. You couldn't stand up very easily, and it went on over the Christmas period. And we've also got, amongst Squadron photographs, members with their Christmas ration, which, if memory serves me right, was a compo ration of meat and vegetables. Not very appetising, and we had dry biscuits. We had no bread because there was no bakery or source of production of any baker's products until well after the time we'd been in North Africa. And then after we'd been in North Africa for a time, we moved to another airfield called Souk El Kemis. And most of our time we spent at that airfield during the actual time we were approaching the Tunis and ceasing hostilities in that area. One of the things which was outstanding was the Kasserine Pass. And I remember that the Americans had had difficulty in holding it, and 152 were amongst the Spitfire squadrons that were involved in that particular part of the campaign. Memory is very difficult to recall all the events that happened over 70 years ago, bearing in mind that I'm now approaching the age of 94, which is in about another couple of months, or just over. But many of the times I can remember quite clearly. When I was at Souk El Kemis, I was responsible for installing electric lighting in the tents, and with the aid of my electricians we gave lighting for most of the time without any problems. If there were any possibilities of the enemy approaching our airfield, we just switched the lighting off at the generator, which was in a mobile transport, a Meadows engine. The thing that was most memorable about it was how difficult it was to start the Meadows engine, and I very often had to get the most beefy and brawny man available to do the starting, because it always worked on a starting handle, no electric buttons. One day we did get a raid, and we were warned, and we stood by what was our air raid precaution trench. I believe there were 4 of us. 3 of the lads got in the trench and I stood on the side, but after seeing the aircraft approaching us, which I think were FW-190s, they pulled me into the trench, fortunately, because at that moment shells hit the ground where we'd been standing, and 2 500-pound bombs were dropped. Probably one of the few incidents at that particular period that we were under attack. Normally we were fairly fortunate in that area. The aircraft were flown by the pilots of all different nationalities. We had men from Australia, I believe, New Zealand and Canada. There was one particular pilot if I remember right, he was a sergeant pilot, and he always used to talk to us on the ground, very friendly man. His memory, I'm afraid I've forgotten his name, but I used to like him a great deal. And unfortunately, he was flying on one sortie, and his aircraft was shot down. One bullet, I think, was responsible. It struck the cables in his aircrafts, and of course he lost complete control and just crashed. And then I believe he was buried in this local cemetery in Tunisia. I've no doubt some member of the squadron will remember his name. I should. The strange things was we didn't have a particularly good period of weather in North Africa, and when the change in the seasons began, the one period where we pitched our tents in a wadi, I think that's the right expression, it flooded, and our parachute packer had got his tent right in the most vulnerable position, and he had to dig all around his tent so that the water was taken round the tent, and he was left as an island trying to pack his chutes for the pilots. I do remember one thing about it. His record in saving pilots by parachute was fairly considerable. The parachute packer came from Birmingham. I think he lived at Great Bar. Whether he's still alive, of course, is very debatable, as so many of my colleagues now have passed on. Language was no difficulty really, because our airfields were fairly isolated, and the only time we ever met the native population was when we either went into one of the nearby towns or something of that nature, and we could usually find someone that could speak a little French and get by in that way. One of the things I remember was I was in Tunisia was a journey through Medjez al-Bab and Longstop Hill. When we were on the troop ship going to North Africa, the Coldstream Guards came on to our boat, and one of the things they did, because they were last on, they wanted to get the NCOs off their billet or berth and take over, but we were adamant we weren't going to do, so they said, well, can we have just one sleeping on the floor? But in the time they were with us, they said to me personally, you're going to have your hair cut. And I said, well, I don't need my hair cut. I've only just had it cut. So well, you can have it cut again. And that night, four very stalwart and beefy guardsmen came in, and they cut my hair right to the roots. I've virtually got no hair when they finished. I took it all in good part, fortunately. I don't think I got any other alternative, but it was a thing to remember. And when I got that onto dry land, one of our members that were with us said, "What, you had your haircut like that, Frank?" "Poor Frank." I said, "Well, how would you deal with it?" I said, "I had no alternative. When the guards came on, they just pounced on me and cut my hair, and that was it. There was no ifs or buts about it." We made our way to Tunis eventually. We'd done travels to other parts of the country, but Tunis was the biggest city, and we did have quite a nice visit there. I think it was at the time when they had a parade, or victory parade, and the first army and the 8th Army had sent men to parade in Tunis. I didn't feel I wanted to go to that, but I did go to Tunis because I wanted to see the town. And we did go to quite a nice bar where we had a few drinks, and I think we had the intelligence officer with us, who was employed normally, I believe, by the Yorkshire Post, the newspaper back in England. He was quite a well-travelled man, and he gave us quite a good insight into the work goings on of this city. We eventually left North Africa, and we went by boat. Well, it was not a boat, it was a landing craft which could take vehicles of all sizes, and we landed with these vehicles in transit camp for a day or two, and then went onto the boats and went across to Malta. One of the most exciting experiences, I think, was going into Valletta Harbour. And I remember that the Warspite was in the harbour, which had been involved in a lot of skirmishes in the Mediterranean at that time. When we were in Malta, we were a bit scattered. The pilots were billeted in Slima, and the NCOs, of which I was one, were in Messina House in Rabat, which was very close to Umdina, the old capital of Malta. I did manage to visit Umdina. Of course, it's very much a Roman Catholic stronghold. And at that period, I was out walking completely on my own one day when a vehicle came along with open top and two people in it. And the one person I immediately recognised was the King, George VI. And I think he was with Lord Gort. I think that was the general or the officer who's accompanying him. I may be wrong on that, but they drove down into Rabat and were obviously making a tour of the island. I also remember watching from the side of that area the sailing of the fleet initially going to Sicily, which was our next port of call. And to go there, we went in an infantry landing craft, which was a much smaller vessel than the one we'd had to bring us from the North African coast. We landed at Syracuse, and I remember we then made our way to Lentini East, which was to be our airfield. And when we got there, all it was a field growing tomatoes. What happened then was we thought, well, our rations are a bit boring. Well, we collected the tomatoes, and I think we filled 40-gallon oil drums with tomatoes from this field, and then we gave them to our cooks, and they served them up in various forms together with our meals, which was made a big difference. Lentini was not very far from Gabini, where the Germans had got the airfields for their aircraft. I don't remember seeing any of their aircraft, even though we were so close. But I do remember that Montgomery had his caravans there, and he was billeted there on the side of our airfield, and must have conducted part of the campaign from that particular site. We didn't see much of Sicily, but we did go onto Mount Etna. That was quite a surprise, because we actually slept on Mount Etna, and I think, if I remember rightly, we did climb more or less to the top, and then after that we made our way to Milazzo, which was where we were in transit, waiting to go to Italy. What actually happened was we went from Sicily back to Malta, into the harbour again, and then we refuelled and took on water and so forth. And then we went from there in an LST with all our vehicles to make a landing at Salerno. We landed at Salerno, and I drove a lorry or trailer combined onto the beach and up to the beach head, and then was directed to where I'd got to make the next visit, which was a place called Aza. Aza was an airfield, was under shelling for all the time we were there. They did say, you must leave because it's too dangerous to remain here with the aircraft and the personnel. And from there we went through a place called Battipaglia. Battipaglia was one of the worst bombings I'd ever seen. It was literally flat. And then we passed on through there, and we went to Serratel, where we were billeted in a tobacco factory. The tobacco was still hanging in the building, and we were below the hanging tobacco. I remember there was a very severe storm there one night, and everybody was called out to picket the aircraft down on the field, because they were just blowing hither and thither, and they would have been severely damaged had we not taken that action. We weren't there very long before we went to Rome, to Naples. We were on Naples airport 72 hours after the army had taken the town. I think we were there maybe under a week, and then we went over to Gioia del Colle. I don't remember much about that. I do remember though that we went to Bari, which was a nice seaside place. I would imagine in peacetime it would have been exceedingly good to visit. I didn't think it was a bad place when we went. We were there just a few days, and then we moved on to Toronto to board a transport. The Talma was the name. Talma was a boat that took us from Toronto across to Alexandria. I think it took us 2 days, if I remember rightly. Alexandria was a fine city, probably one of the best that I visited. And then we made our way by train through Cairo, of which we saw nothing except the station. Then we went to the Tufik, which was at the one end of the Suez Canal. And there we got on board the Strathmore, which was quite a big liner, and was to take us down the Red Sea and across the Arabian Sea to Bombay. We weren't there very long, but we did get a chance to go into Bombay to one of the soap works. And the owners of the soap works, I believe, were Leavers, well-known company, of course, and they allowed us to use their swimming pool, which I think also was used as an air raid precaution if they needed water for the hoses. But we managed to get a dip there, and then we were at Worley, the transit camp, and that part of Bombay was quite imposing, lots of big flats, and well worth a visit. And all the Indians used to turn out in the evenings and stroll along the promenade, as I would term it. After that, we embarked from Bombay, and as a senior NCO, I was allocated the job of escorting 70 airmen by train to Calcutta, which was very interesting. I was fortunate because I got a sleeper, so obviously I was treated quite well. I don't think the men did too badly, but I used to feel, oh, I shouldn't be in this situation, a youngster like me and all these old men having to travel on the ordinary transport. Anyway, we did reach Calcutta quite safely. Calcutta was a fine city. There were lots of slums, of course, but the part we were in, Chowringhee, was well known, and we did visit a restaurant called Furpo, where we got some very fine food and were waited upon by Indians in their traditional dress, bare feet, turbans and white gowns, for the words escape me at the moment. The proper words were what they were wearing, but it was a good meal, one I would remember. I was lucky when I was in Calcutta because we needed spares for the aircraft, and I went to one place where they made batteries. The batteries, of course, were Lucas, and we were able to pick up 1 or 2 useful spares and take them back to our squadron. The squadron was flying from Red Road. Red Road was one of the roads down by the docks in Calcutta. Quite interesting that, to think that they were flying off a road which was hardly wide enough to take a couple of buses, let alone a Spitfire, but they did take off. And I think that was where our aircraft did actually get their first attack on Japanese aircraft with success. Our next journey was by river. We went down the Hooghly. The Hooghly River goes through the Sundarbans and it comes out in the Bay of Bengal. And we made that trip to the Bay of Bengal, and we got to our destination and we boarded a narrow gauge Bengal and Assam railway there. And I remember it took us down to Chittagong, probably double moorings, but we were at both double moorings and Chittagong at various times. It's a job to remember exactly which one it was. But they were the airfields which we were on for a time. Strange thing is now, if we were to make that journey, we'd be able to do it by road, because there's a bridge that goes over the river, which is part of the Brahmaputra. And in the monsoon weather, of which we were involved, the flooding was very, very severe. In those days, you used two railways. You used the normal railway and the narrow gauge, depending on which part of Assam you were in. I also remember while we were in Bangladesh, we had a visit to a place called Cherrapunji, run by a Welsh mission, probably came out from England. But they gave us a very good meal and looked after us very well. It was in the great heights in that area, and it was very, very misty. We couldn't see a great deal on the day we went because of the mist. But the thing that impressed me most was when they said that what the rainfall was there, and it was 450 inches a year. I think I got it right. I know it was the heaviest rainfall on earth, and one you could well believe, because we did see a lot of rain in that locality. From there, we made our way to various airfields. Some were permanent, others were just fields wherever they had to take us. In fact, one is just a beach. And when the tide went out, the aircraft could land. And when the beach got a high tide, of course they had to stop flying. But that was another type of airfield which we were on. It wasn't long after we'd got down onto Cox's Bazaar, I believe it was, that I saw different places. Camilla was one, and Fenny. And while I was at Fenny, I was posted from 152 Squadron, and I went to number 4 Indian Air Force Squadron, which became the Royal Indian Air Force Squadron, and which had also got the Commonwealth pilots training there, and so ended my spell with 152, and I was now in the Indian Air Force, which I remained until the end of the war.